Agogo tó ń ka wákàtí ọjọ́, ka wákàtí mi sí re o. Good morning, everybody. Maybe by force of habit, I feel a whole lot better with myself when I see indication from those of you who I see online. 12 of you, I'm told. I would love to have an indication that we're fine with audio. I don't want to presume, even though I guess at some point I'm going to have to. But, good morning, my mama 147, whoever you are. Good morning to you. So, I'll take it we're good. The week that was has been something of a mixed basket. It was my birthday in that week. And even though I did all I could to make sure that you guys would forget, a whole lot of you didn't forget. And you didn't allow me to forget either. You were effusive in your good wishes and prayers for me. And I'm very grateful to all of you. Thank you very much. May God bless you all. May you find yourself surrounded by love on all sides, even as I felt on my birthday and even beyond. Thank you for everything. I appreciate. But in that same week, a young man, one who has risen up in his own generation to speak truth, even though it be uncomfortable. I've seen his work online. He's generally known as Justice Crack. Was abducted by men believed to be members of the Nigerian army. I will be speaking more in depth when I preach, or shall I say, deliver my lecture for this morning. But what happened to Justice Crack, at least the little we know so far, is merely a window into what happens to the Nigerian victim on a daily basis. It is alarming on multiple levels, only because this is happening to somebody who has some level of media presence, and it's almost impossible to have disappeared without consequences, at least without public outcry. But this is what happens on a normal basis in Nigeria. It's merely a window. Practically every uniformed goon feels himself able to do as he cares. And telling the truth is becoming the duties of outliers, not the normal thing that a society encourages. In actual fact, it reminds me of my time in the university, where it was easier for you to be rusticated or expelled from the university for being a student union activist than for being a member of one of the murderous gangs that were called confraternities. So you find that the Nigerian state is becoming a place where truth is discouraged, and it is safer to simply keep quiet. That is the message they would like to transmit. But that is if we agree. In the week that was, I saw a video, a young woman somewhere in Abuja whose sister died because of 15,000 naira to transfuse blood. In the week that was. In the week that was, Amukwiton, the APC apparatchik, is still heading INEC. And those we label politicians have not found the grace to demand his removal, mobilize the people to demand his removal. And they are preparing for an election in 2027. How do you prepare for an election whose umpire is manifestly compromised? In the week that was, El-Rufai is still in prison. Now, I mentioned that deliberately because I saw the reactions during the course of the week from some people who felt it was wrong to advocate that he should be treated using the due process of the law. Let me explain something. If we do not demand that those we find objectionable, odious, be treated and afforded the due process of law, how do we demand the same when it is our own kind or person that are facing the same persecution? How? It is our capacity to advocate for the respect for the right of persons we know to be evil and have declared evil. It is in finding the grace to advocate for respect for their fundamental rights that we have legitimacy to demand that all of us should be treated with legal order applied and not impunity. If we cannot advocate for the freedom of our enemies, not because we have declared them enemies, but because they consider us so, how do we begin to demand respect for our own rights? El-Rufai is a card-carrying member of the Nigerian reigning class. Card-carrying member, a blue-blooded member. And if they will treat one of their own the way he's being treated, with our acquiescence, where would we find the moral ground point from which to demand that we be treated with the due process of the law? From where? If it is sauce for the goose, it is sauce for the gander. If I legitimize evil when it is done to a person I find objectionable, from where do I derive the legitimacy to demand that I be treated any different? This is where we must find the grace to condemn evil when it is done. Whether that person be Malami, a most despicable person who had no respect for the rule of law as the Attorney General of this country, or whether that be El-Rufai, a person who should still be talking to the police if we were a society ruled by law about the disappearance of Daddy Yatta, especially now that he himself has come out into the public space to claim that he knows what happened to Daddy Yatta. But we're not demanding that this be done because we're still busy applauding the treatment of an evil man by an evil system. But systems deal with persons, regardless of who the person is, once the person is funneled into that system. If we legitimize what is happening by keeping quiet because we don't like the persons to whom it is happening, it's going to happen to us because exactly what happened to Daddy Yatta is what is being processed for Justice Crack. It's the system that has allowed it. We should be careful about normalizing it. In the week that was, something happened that I'll be coming back to repeatedly in the course of my lecture this morning. It was the victimization, the ultimate victimization of the person who would be a citizen but isn't, or rather, who would be a citizen but wasn't, but was definitely a victim of Nigeria. Mene Ogidi. He was murdered by an ASP, Nuhu Usman. Mene Ogidi, I believe his last words was, I go tell you everything. Now my friend deceive me. I go tell you everything. Now my friend deceive me. Those were his last words before Nuhu Usman paid and kitted, however poorly he's paid and kitted by the Nigerian police, turned his gun on Mene Ogidi and he killed him. This is not just about the killing of one victim. This is about a system that is built on impunity. There is a chapter in my first book, Do Not Die in Their War, where I described the eye-opening experience I had at the age of 16, going on 17, when I was slapped by a policeman. That slap recalibrated my brain, and I became fully aware of the fact that however much the Nigerian might desire or delude himself into believing that he is a citizen, he is most definitely anything but a citizen. Citizens are products of legal orders, and legal orders would suggest the rule of law. And I became aware very quickly that the one thing that does not rule in the country Nigeria is law. I didn't really need I didn't need too many lessons after that slap to awaken me to my reality. Maybe this was because as a child, I was what you would call a citizen of the world. I read far and wide as a child, so I knew who a citizen was. I read all the Billy Bunters. Can you imagine? I didn't stick with African writers series. I read British literature, English, Welsh literature, Commonwealth literature, New Zealand, Australian, even translated Russian folk tales. I read far and wide and I knew who a citizen was. But I don't want to get ahead of myself this morning. I think it is critical that all of us as a collective, if you're on social media, wherever you are that you carry a voice, begin to demand accountability for Justice Crack. There's very little we can do about Mene Ogidi until we are ready to focus on the system, and I'll be doing a lot of that in my sermon this morning. But as far as it relates to Justice Crack, if you're on social media, please latch on to that hashtag. It's the Nigerian army that is said to be holding him. Hopefully, they haven't done their usual thing of killing without accountability. Hopefully. But it is critical that we all begin to speak up, to demand that it should be released or subjected to the due process of law if there should be any reason whatsoever. But at this point, if his arresters, his abductors, would not follow the due process of law, it will be mighty rich for them. It will be mighty rich for them to be demanding due process at this point. The young man needs to be released. Thank you very much. That was the week that was. It's 10 o'clock now. And yes, I noticed somebody said I sound very tired. Nigeria is tiring. It is tiring in the extreme. And it actually takes some special level of grace to remain optimistic and boisterous in the country. Oh, somebody is informing me that the army said they have, well, we thank God, at least we know he's alive and we'll know what follows. So, good morning, everybody. You know, I was invited by the NBA Oka to deliver a lecture in honor of Amanke Ozo Okafo. That was on the 16th of April. And because the chairman kept insisting that he would like to have a text of my lecture, I was forced to sit down and put something together. And I was going to deliver a lecture titled exactly what we have today: the centrality of the rule of law to the idea of citizenship. But at the last minute, I changed my mind in Oka because it was like, I will be talking to lawyers. These are people already trained in the precepts and or in each and every one of these doctrines. So it felt to me like I'll be preaching to the choir. There was nothing I was going to say to them that they hadn't been taught at one point or the other during their education as lawyers. But when Mene Ogidi was murdered in cold blood by Nuhu Usman, this issue came back to me: the centrality of the rule of law to the idea of citizenship. Multiple times I have been heard to declare, both in speech and in writing, that the Nigerian is not a citizen. But every time I have said this, a lot of persons who have very little understanding of the idea of citizenship have pulled me up and suggested that perhaps I am being extreme in the way that I speak or describe Nigeria. And because I tend to speak in absolute terms, and as I've said multiple times as well, I dislike linguistic inexactitude. If a word is meant to mean something, if a precept or concept is meant to mean something, then it should mean what it is said to mean. So I know, and I have always said, that the Nigerian is not a citizen. So the question to ask: who is a citizen? There was a gentleman, Ni Taiwo. He made a distinction that I believe applies very directly to Nigeria, but let me, first of all, let us be clear about something. Citizenship is essentially a legal and social contract. It takes place between the individual and the state. It is a legal contract at the level where the person has a passport. He establishes his legal standing in the world. So you carry your Nigerian passport. And because you are holding your Nigerian passport, of course, as far as the world is concerned, you are a Nigerian. Yes, he establishes your legal standing. That is why to go to some countries, you have to stay in the sun, queue in the rain to get visas. They get to treat you like dirt because of your legal standing. You are a Nigerian. You are a citizen of Nigeria in the eye of the world. But there is a second level to citizenship. Your rights your right to live in a country, to vote, to be voted for. You have the country's protection when traveling. That's that's right. Your passport. You have the legal protection of your country when traveling. So an American will be abducted in Nigeria and they will ship a special force team into Nigeria to rescue one person. And if you are going to believe the myth during the Persian War that is still hanging, they sent an entire team of C-130s, all kind of fighting machines to go and rescue one pilot. That is the value. Even if they were lying, even if it was propaganda, at the end of the day, that was the value they would like to project for the life of a single American. A single American gets into trouble out of his country, the entire power of the American consulate in that country stands behind the person. Those are his rights as a citizen. The reality is that Nigeria is not a state in the classic sense of a state. States have citizens. Nigeria does not have citizens. Because, let's be clear, when the only thing that binds you as a citizen to the state are your responsibilities to the state and not the duties of the state to you, what that simply means is that the social contract is non-existent. So that social contract that is meant to be both legal and social, that contract of citizenship, which binds me as a citizen to certain duties and responsibilities to the state, binds the state to certain duties and responsibilities to me. And when those have shifted, remember the duty to rebel, the duty to reconstitute. But that those two only arose at the point where your own existence as a citizen has been placed in jeopardy. You can be a citizen in Nigeria, or you can be a citizen of Nigeria. If you're a citizen in Nigeria, it means that you are enjoying the full range of rights that should be yours as a citizen under the full protection of the law, which binds you even as it binds those who rules you. When the Lord no longer binds the ruler but continues to bind you, you're no longer a citizen. You are simply at that point a subject of a state. Is the Nigerian a citizen? As far as I'm concerned, you're not. And this is very simple. The centrality of the rule of law to the idea of citizenship suggests that the Nigerian is not ruled by law. And because he is not ruled by law, he is not a citizen, because citizens are ruled by law. Citizens are bound by law just as much as the ruler and the government itself are bound by law. The rule of law is what distinguishes a subject from a citizen. Rule of law guarantees predicted obligations. It protects rights, and it also shares the responsibilities. I, as a citizen, know that I have a duty to pay my taxes and to obey the laws of the land. The government also has a duty to protect my life and to ensure the protection of my properties and my rights. Well, how does this track with a situation where a young man, Justice Crack, was abducted and it has taken only the concerted noise from citizens and advocacy group before the army, who considers itself an arresting authority, will now hand him over to the DSS? What happens to the police? Even if the same police will kill Mene Ogidi, to whom a person was. Can you see the systemic impunity that governs your country? How can you be a citizen in a place that is not yoked to law? Let me remind us, in 2016, the Shia were marching. I believe it was in Zaria. Boratai's convoy was driving, and his preferred pathway was blocked by the Shia procession. By Kaduna State official count, 430 Shia Muslims were murdered by Buratai's troop. Now tell me, were those citizens 430 murdered in one day? The Shia suggested that there were over 1,000 murders. Government acknowledged 430. Now, one of the reasons why this number has been easy for most of you to accept is because you're not looking at human beings. Nigeria has a way of dematerializing humanity by labels. Because these were Shia Muslims, their victimization was normalized for the Sunni majority. Their humanity was disconnected for the southern Christians. The loss of their lives, their cold-blooded murder by soldiers, became acceptable for other Nigerians. Very few found relativity in their murder. Of what business is it of the baboon if the monkeys have diarrhea? The average Nigerian went about their business. With the press and influencers, Shias were labeled as extremists, deserving of summary execution. 430 by official count, over 1,000 by Shia enumeration. 430 Nigerians murdered in broad daylight, 2016. But why don't we go back a little more? Let's go back a little further. Odi, an entire community leveled. Zaki Biam, an entire community leveled. Nigeria has a history of murdering those it mislabels as citizens. When the founder of Boko Haram, Yusuf, was apprehended, was murdered on video, even after he had been apprehended. The Nigerian state constantly circumvents its own laws. It observes laws more in breach than in observance. What wounds might have been healed and what lessons might have been learnt if he was tried instead of being summarily executed? The last words of Mene Ogidi, he said, I go tell you everything. Now my friend deceive me. Oh no. No, Usman had no interest in hearing anything. All he wanted was the guy's life. And he took it summarily. I could hear on the video somebody say, oh, the boy was lucky. Maybe the original shot fired on camera got him in the shoulder. It didn't kill him immediately. But they put him in the truck and they took him to their station and finished him off there. This is systemic. I have told the story in another essay somewhere. I was in my house one day and a friend called me. His daughter was being kidnapped right inside our own estate. But the estate had its own security men. So they blocked the gate and didn't allow these persons to leave. And then these persons identified themselves as policemen. They had tracked my friend's daughter, found that somebody they were looking for, another student in our school, who didn't want anything to do with her father, a child who was about 25, much older than my friend's daughter. She had a dispute with her father, and the father mobilized the police. They got some court order to be tracking the daughter's phone. By tracking her phone, they knew she was in contact with my friend's daughter. They came into my friend's estate to kidnap the daughter so that the daughter might be used to lure the person they are looking to reunite with her father forcefully. The entire powers of the Nigerian state, from the magistrate who signed the warrant to tap the girl's phone, to the police, everybody knew the truth. But because the powers of the Nigerian state must be deployed. Interestingly, the gentleman or crook who mobilized all this was one of my Oriental brothers. And I'm saying this so that you would understand the multiple layers of citizenship that exist in Nigeria. I'll bring the relevance of that later on. Nigeria is a place that is not yoked to law. The rule of law means that there is a constant shift from person to principle with the protection of the law. The citizen is not subject to the whims of the ruler, and the law applies to both the ruled and the rulers equally. That is what happens in places ruled by law. Predictability, the certainty of the law assures the predictability of life. Everybody knows what their rights and obligations are. You know, in Yoruba, we have a proverb. It says, "Ìlú tí kò sófin, ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ò sí ńbẹ̀." Where there are no laws, there can be no crimes. If you don't know the Yorubas, you fall very easily for that and begin to imagine the existence of a place where the laws do not exist. But there is nothing like that in Yoruba thinking. What they're saying is where the laws are ineffectual, where the laws are not enforced, there can be no crime. And that is what we have in Nigeria. Because for the Yoruba person, for something to be law, it must be universally applicable. Where it is not universally applicable, then it is not law. It is that simple. He says, "Ibita abieru labiomo." The way the slave is battered is the same way the freeborn is battered as well. And they go further. They say, "Tá a bá ń torí ẹrú ṣòfin ká rántí ọjọ́ tí ó mọ̀ọ́mọ̀ joyè." When you make laws because of the slave, remember the day when the son of the titled will be ensnared by the same laws. They understood that without universal application of law, the law becomes ineffectual. A story is often told about one of the princes of the Oyo kingdom. I believe it was either Alaafin Abiodun, but I think it was Abiodun. Abiodun was, as a prince, said to have gone. Don't quote me on the name, but I know this is a factual tale. He was said to have, after the Alaafin had outlawed slave trade, he was said to have gone slave trading, and then he was arrested by one of his father's vassals, and he was punished. And after he had become king, he had the person picked up, and he was going to punish the person for having punished him when he was a prince. And I'm told that this person now responded that he was merely carrying out the dictate of the law in doing what he did. Whether this was merely an allegory or whether it's fact-based, the important thing is that in Yoruba thinking, laws must apply universally for it to be law. Privileges existed, yes. Somebody just said it is Atiba. I'm not sure. The point I'm making is this. For the Yoruba, for something to be a law, it must be universally applicable. It mustn't be that it applies to the child of the townsman and it wouldn't apply to the child of the king. Where privileges are given that are granted to the princes or princelings, these are universally known and these are exceptions. And this is not incompatible with the rule of law. Exceptions exist in some cases. But ordinarily, there must be predictability. There must be accountability. The reality is that if accountability is non-existent, if the citizens are unable to hold the state accountable, impunity emerges, and impunity is incompatible with citizenship. Everybody must be equally bound and equally held accountable by law for there to be anything approaching citizenship in a space. There must be protection for the minority, even those me and you do not like or find objectionable or do not. Okay, let me give you a case in point. When Brother Bobrisky was persecuted on account of spraying money at a party, a lot of you found support for his persecution because he identifies as gay, or at least as a cross-dresser. You just simply don't like his lifestyle. I don't like him. But who is him? I don't know him. But that is the instinctive reaction of every bigot. Everything you don't like, you hate. Once you don't understand the thing, you don't like it. It's not your business to like or not like the person. The question is, would you want to be treated in the manner that that person had been treated? After Bobrisky, how many people have gone to prison for spraying money? How many times have you seen multiple persons, including government officials, spraying money? But it was easy for you to identify with the persecutors of Bobrisky because he was a person you found objectionable. In finding his person objectionable, you legitimize his treatment. In legitimizing his treatment, you silence yourself when the same is meted to you. And this is how we have built a society that has become acculturated to impunity, whilst we continue to delude ourselves that we are citizens. Every minority, including of thought, because it is not only of identity, of sex or gender, sometimes minority in thought, are deserving of the protection of the law as long as they also obey the law. The due process of the law is just as important as the law itself. Let me show you. Under Yakubu, the last chairman of INEC, at least he pretended to be non-partisan, unlike your current one. Subsidiary legislations were made under the Electoral Act. It was those subsidiary legislations that laid out the process by which we'll vote and our votes will be counted. IREF, BVAS, and all of that. Those were the subsidiary legislations, part of the due process of the law governing the election. INEC suspended his own process. The judiciary that should hold it accountable to the process it had advertised became an accomplice. And that was why Yahoo would tell you, go to court. He knew his accomplices were waiting in the court. How do you talk about citizenship in a place that is not ruled by law? When my topic was being crafted, because I was at the time looking at the topicality of the argument of Amokuton's partisanship, I wanted to add to the topic, but I felt it would become too long. Because if we talk about the centrality of the rule of law to the idea of citizenship, surely we must understand the centrality of the rule of law to the idea of democracy, because they are all intricately linked. Citizens are the ones who have democracies because their votes count, because the due process of law would ensure that their fundamental right to act as a sovereign will be protected by law. They become active participants in the democracy. They vote and are voted for. And their votes would count. And the courts would demand the sanctity of their vote. But that is not the story in the Nigerian democracy. We have a democracy where the courts are actively active, very active in limiting citizens' access to the ballot. Almost every political party that is not aligned with the APC in one turmoil or the other, all engineered using the judicial process. And they will tell you it's the rule of law. The Attorney General of the Federation actually went to court to file a case demanding the deregistration of a political party in a democracy. The law does not rule in this land. And the sooner we start telling ourselves the truth, the better. The fact of the matter is that active participation and agency, the insistence of members of a state on participation in the process of governance is indicative of the sense of belonging that they have, either as citizens or as stakeholders in the process. In a situation where the rule of law becomes manifestly absent, as is the case in our country, Nigeria, one of the first things that you find very quickly is voters apathy, because the people come to lose confidence in the capacity of the system to deliver change. Look at where we were in 2022 in the lead up to 2023. Look at where we are today. It gives you an idea of how the people have voted in their heads in relation to confidence in in both the judicial process and the electoral process. Look, if you look at the modern states with citizens, you find that the source of power in the state is the constitution because of the preeminence of the rule of law. The constitution becomes a ground norm. Every other legislation and laws flows from that constitution, and to the extent of their incompatibility, they will be struck down by the judiciary. So the totality of the rule of law takes its root from the constitution. In Nigeria, Decree 24 of 1999 is the constitution. It is the encapsulation of the will of the military junta that had taken over Nigeria after it refused to honor the wishes of the Nigerian people as expressed in the 1993 election. It is a fraudulent document. I say that without any hesitation, but it is the Constitution of Nigeria, the existing legal basis for the existence of the Nigerian state. It is the document that is meant to bind me as a citizen, even though its very existence stands in rebuke of the idea of my own citizenship. Because if I were a citizen, I should have a say as to what constitution governs me. But neither myself nor my parents before me had any say. But let's pretend and accept that that document is not the fraud that it is. It simply means that it is what should govern myself and govern those who rule me. In that constitution or that fraud, I have a plethora of rights guaranteed to me. I have a plethora of responsibilities placed on me. But so do governments at every level. The legal standing in any sane society is that there is inherent equality of all the persons who are defined by legal standing. Remember, I've always talked about a composite citizen. Who is the Nigerian? That Nigerian that you can take from Bukuru to Kuru to Igbeti to Umuahia to anywhere within the space called Nigeria, and the identity does not shift, which means there is equal standing before the law. Who is that Nigerian? Can we say that in relation to the Nigerian? Because where we are, the country we've built, your loyalty and your status would appear to determine how you're treated. In the state that we have built, rights are granted and revocable. But in a place ruled by law, rights are protected by law. The full force of the state stands behind you. When there is prosecutorial malfeasance, the prosecutor is obliged by law to hone up so that even the most guilty person in the eye of everybody gets to walk free simply because those who are charged to uphold the law did not follow due process. This is what happens in places ruled by law. When disputes arises, as they are meant to arise and as they will always arise in every human collective, in Nigeria, it is decided by impunity. The army does not like what Justice Crack was saying. They get him carried. They keep him for days, and after outcry, now they've handed him over to the DSS, who will now be. What is the business of the DSS with a citizen's expression of his fundamental right to expression, to his freedom of expression? What is the business of the army? Disputes are decided by impunity, but in places ruled by law. And when a place is ruled by law, it's suggestive of an independent judiciary, not one governed by people who are singing and standing on mandates. Let us be very clear. Citizenship is what transforms a subject from a mere inhabitant or denizen of a land into a protected member of a community with the power to shape its future. The Nigerian is not a citizen. The centrality of the rule of law means that if the law does not rule, you cannot have citizens, because citizenship can only exist in a place where people are treated equally, treated the same. Somebody has to explain to me how we can ascribe equal treatment to those who live in Nigeria or anywhere else, where persons captured on battlefields, persons who are self-confessed rapists, murderers, kidnappers, are routinely de-radicalized and absorbed into the army of that state. But there is a man today sat in a prison convicted for incitement to terrorism and I think treason. Make it make sense to me. This is the same country where Jackson in Adamawa was convicted of murder because he killed a man who attacked him on his own farm with the knife the man was attacking him with and had injured him multiple times, after being stabbed him. And the highest court of that country convicted the person defending himself on his father's farm of murder. It took the outcry of the rest of the world. I was student union president in LASU 32 years ago. It was all right to be called a student union activist, but it's a shame, and I do not see it as anything I don't see it as something honorable to be called a human rights activist. Why am I or anybody being activist for human rights? This is the most basic of citizenship rights. It's a human right. It goes beyond being a citizen. But 60 something years 66, almost 66 years after independence, I am supposed to be advocating for human rights in Nigeria. And we are lying to ourselves that we are citizens. Nigeria is not a state in the true sense of the word state. It is a criminal enterprise. And we delude ourselves when we tell ourselves that we are citizens. The sooner we come to the knowledge of the fact that we are not citizens and then bound together as one to demand to be treated as citizens, the sooner they will stop victimizing us in the manner that we have been victimized serially as a collective. Whilst they have divided you to the point where you normalize the victimization of fellow victims. Yeah, fellow victims. Over 100 Yoruba Obas have fled Kwara. If the Obas are fleeing, you can imagine the desolation in the countryside. It's not so far away any longer. But these things are happening because we have allowed it as a collective. What you tolerate becomes the culture. The things we have allowed is because we've allowed ourselves to be divided and fractionalized. Isn't it interesting that the Shia Muslims in Nigeria, recipients of the most brutal systemic massacre carried out against a religious minority, found solidarity when Iran was attacked? All of a sudden, they are their Muslim brothers. But when they are being murdered by the Shia authorities in Nigeria, by the Sunni authorities in Nigeria, nobody remembers the universal brotherhood of the Muslim. But these are the things we must never forget. The universal brotherhood of humanity. If we are not citizens, then we are all victims. And it is in the realization of this that we must find common purpose. The Nigerian is not a citizen. In the absence of the rule of law, you cannot have citizenship. And just as you cannot have citizenship, I'm afraid to say to you, you also cannot have a democracy. If you are going to have a democracy, you are going to have to fight for it. Just as if you are going to also be citizens, you are going to have to fight to be citizens. A place that is not governed by law is not tolerant of citizenship. As things stand today, you are anything but citizens. Find common purpose. It is in the commonality of your purpose that you can build citizenship. I've had a beautiful time speaking with you this week. I hope and pray that we'll see ourselves again next week. But let me say this as I close. The truth is eternal. The eternal nature of the truth renders it immortal. The things we say to ourselves, I am confident that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, if not for this generation, then for another, we would have reasons to come back to them. Speak your truth in your space. If Justice Crack wasn't speaking his truth, they wouldn't have seen him. But by seeing him, they've merely purchased immortality for him. But I'm thankful to God that he's alive to witness what they have done for him. May God elevate you. Sometimes your elevation will run through the prison. It happens. I went through mine. God bless you all. And whatever else you do or do not do, Stay safe. Nigeria victimizes routinely. It loves it that way. God bless.